Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again for another show. Hope you're all doing really well on this Thursday. And we've got another background, of course. I've been moving about this week and we are back in the SonOfChelsea studio to break things down regarding the potential next head coach of Chelsea FC. Is there a leading candidate? I'll give you some of my thoughts on the candidates that have been talked about in recent days and some of the stories, and then we'll get into some of the reaction because I think there are so many moving parts within this because, my last show was purely a reaction to the news on Tuesday night about Pochettino, and even though it's only been 2 days, under 48 hours since that news, as you expect, a lot has happened. A lot of things happen in a short period of time in Chelsea history, especially when you are changing a head coach. So we kind of know this is going to be a faster appointment than Pochettino. Not as fast, obviously, as Graham Potter coming in for Thomas Tuchel, but it's going to be a quicker appointment. And I think that makes sense given you've got the Euros coming up. I think that is something people are forgetting where, specifically in the case of transfers, that makes it quite tricky over the summer. And I'm sure players and their agents, some of whom have been a little bit taken aback by the decision to sack or part ways with Mauricio Pochettino, what you believe is you do need to make that clarity stick pretty soon, because then those players will know about the next season. And also I think it just adds a clarity to all of us, right? We know who the next head coach is going to be. We can start to think towards next season. Whilst this uncertainty remains, it is a little bit chaotic, especially when that shock of Pochettino leaving the other day is still up in the air. So some of the names being talked about are ones that we have heard about in recent weeks and months. I think the leading candidate that I'm hearing about at the moment, and I think Jacob Steinberg reporting on this for The Guardian, I know Nazar Kinsella, Simon Johnson has talked about this as well, Kieran McKenna from Ipswich. Apparently Chelsea have contacted Ipswich as they're stepping up their managerial hunt. They are pushing alternative plans in place. So Leicester's Enzo Maresca is a name that's been talked about, but it seems like McKenna is one of those top names, and that doesn't massively surprise me given some of the reports over the type of candidate Chelsea are looking for. A younger coach, someone who plays progressive football. Maybe if you want to be cynical, is not going to be someone with kind of the personality or experience and pedigree of, say, a Jose Mourinho, a Thomas Tuchel and Antonio Conte, who will push back a lot more. That's not to try and denigrate the work of McKenna and his character, but maybe that is part of their thinking. And I think it's something that people obviously are a bit concerned about and critical of the way Chelsea are going about things. But those are the names. Of course, we also have heard about Sebastian Hoeneß at Stuttgart, but he is expected to stay there. Bayern approached him a few weeks ago and he rejected them. Apparently, Eddie Howe is also appreciated, but no approach. De Zerbi and Ruben Amorim are not viewed as likely at this stage, though I have heard in recent days that Amorim could be one of those names again that comes up because, of course, partly a bit of a relationship between Chelsea and Sporting Lisbon, the potential of Chelsea actually buying that club as part of the multi-club model. But just in terms of Amorim, we know he had talks with West Ham. He has been a name that's been linked with many clubs in the Premier League, so might be one to view and pay attention to, and whether Sebastian Hoeneß from Stuttgart, his mind can be changed in the upcoming weeks. So in terms of these candidates, if you're putting me on a spot and say you have to pick from one of them, I think the interest for me is Kieran McKenna. I like Kieran McKenna. There is a little bit of hypocrisy though from the Chelsea point of view in terms of, especially when you hear what the likes of David Ornstein has said as well, in the sense of what they're looking for from a head coach, young, progressive, possession. I think it was Carve Soloko actually from Sky was like possession, obsessed head coach. And again, it's like having Shakar Dimitri pointing this out. It's some of this, very much falls into how clarified is Chelsea's vision. And I had this question in the previous ownership too. Are we just going for a German manager because German managers are doing well and they're kind of the hip thing at the moment? Or is it actually because German head coaches in general are offering a level of, tactical nous, or kind of a style of football that Chelsea want to integrate? And I think it's the same thing here, because if you actually look at Ipswich, and there's a lot of great videos, tactical breakdowns, I'm sure if McKenna becomes serious, we'll be looking at this more in depth, is that they are not a possession-heavy team, or at least they are not a team obsessed purely with having the ball short passes. You look at the numbers in the Championship, and that does not reflect a team like Russell Martin, Southampton, or Enzo Maresca at Leicester, who are going to play that style of football. I personally think that is better, because what I've liked about Mauricio Pochettino and what he brought to Chelsea was a little bit less really rigid, control ball. And I think some players like Cole Palmer really benefited from that this season. And what I wouldn't want to see is a regression on that sense to a feeling that a frustration we had under Graham Potter, a frustration we had under Thomas Tuchel of, really controlling these players to a point where that expression, that creativity, that freedom is taken away from them. And maybe we see a regression. And I actually like the fact that with Ipswich, they look like a really dynamic and versatile team who sure have scored some lovely aesthetically pleasing goals, but seem like a team that can hurt you in a variety of ways. And that's clearly got the best out of his group of players. So from a tactical point of view, from an approach point of view, I think Chelsea should be looking at someone who's against the mould and against the grain of Pep Guardiola and Mikel Arteta. If you're just looking for a poor imitation of those coaches, I think you're going to fail. And I do think we are maybe getting to a stage where football goes like that in terms of waves, in terms of sort of tactical ideas and approaches being popular, being in trend, being effective, and then turning around the other way. I think it would be smarter for Chelsea to look at a coach who isn't solely reliant on that and actually, maybe plays a style and brand of football that's more in keeping with Chelsea, of not being sort of a club that's always been ideologues in kind of, we have to play this, there's Chelsea way, and that kind of has never been a part of our history. So I like the flexibility of McKenna in that sense. There is the obvious elephant in the room of you're going from Ipswich to Chelsea, the scrutiny, the intensity, the politics of that job. And as a head coach, a young head coach, I can't believe that it hasn't at least entered the mind of Kieran McKenna, no matter what maybe the differences between him and Graham Potter are. And I'm not dismissing those, but looking at what happened to Graham Potter when he decided after a really good spell at Brighton, where his stock was very high, to move to Chelsea, and how wrong that was. And also just beyond whether you just look at that example, what the chaotic feeling of Chelsea is, and walking into an environment where you are replacing a guy, Mauricio Pochettino, who done an all right job based on the end of the league season, and still that wasn't enough. And the pressure will be on him, not as with Ipswich to try and keep them in the Premier League. It will be to get Champions League football. So that step up in scrutiny and politics and dealing with the current sporting director structure, which I don't think is that impressive at the moment, and the potential of those falling outs happening again, and the massive carousel we've seen of revolving door of coaches we have seen at Stamford Bridge since the takeover, even more so than kind of Chelsea history, raises some alarm bells. And I think that's the case with anyone, right? I mean, whether you throw me McKenna, Ruben Amorim, of course, has been admired for a long period of time with the work he's done at Lisbon. Whoever it is, I think those are the same principles. I just think maybe it's a little bit more extreme, where McKenna has done such a wonderful job at Ipswich, and those standards, if you want to call it, or that expectation, that culture there to go from League One to the Championship, so extraordinary, and he deserves the plaudits for that. But to jump to Chelsea is a huge jump, and it's whether those intangible things can translate, and he is a good enough and strong enough character to arrive at the club and convince people on and off the pitch that he's the right man. I also want to talk about here, I think the second part of this, right? Because, as I say, Maresca doesn't really excite me. I don't think he's done a wonderful job at Leicester. Yes, they got back in the Premier League, but you have to factor in their financial advantage in the Championship. And again, I don't see him as someone that I feel like, really excites me. I really feel like Chelsea are really being inventive in that style of coaching. And again, if you're just going to go with the grain, I think, Arteta and Pep are already miles ahead of you. Are you just trying to get like a knockoff of that? And now you're actually going to hurt your chances in the long term, especially if that specific coach needs very specialist players. We know the issues in kind of squad flexibility and signing the right profile players who are going to last you several years. That's my concern. So that's why I like what McKenna has done. Just the fact of he's walked into that club and transformed it, it's hard to argue with. And he's clearly a coach going in an upwards direction. It's whether Chelsea is the right move for him personally. I think a lot of people, especially outside of Chelsea, and even myself, would go, mate, probably it's not the right time for you to move. But maybe he will back himself and feel like this is a chance I cannot turn down. The squad is in a better place than it was, say, when Graham Potter took over. There maybe is a little bit more stability at the club, even though I'd argue against that. But, at the very least, it's an interesting shout. And we'll see if Amorim, as a coach, that's another one I'd be interested to see if that develops, because he's another one that people really like the look of, and I understand why. I just want to look at some of the reactions, because obviously a lot has happened since Tuesday, and I think it'd be flippant to just completely walk away from Pochettino and ignore everything that's happened since then. My reaction to it is what it is. You can go and see it if you haven't already. But One of the things I spoke about in my reaction video was the players and how they would react to this change in head coach, because Pochettino was so popular and the knock-on effect that would have. And Matt Law reported that the Chelsea WhatsApp groups were in meltdown as players were left shocked, real disbelief. And there's been real frustration shared. And I think that was clearly obvious. I said this, even before this all came out, that he was clearly popular amongst the club. The players clearly liked him. And it also speaks to, how maybe the sporting directors and the club view these players. They don't view them as people and human beings that are going to be involved in the process, and what are their priorities? How are they feeling as a group? Getting the best out of this group of players that you've invested in. Part of that is them being happy, being content, feeling like their development is in good hands and they've got good leadership. And it kind of feels like this decision hasn't been taken with them in mind, because really reflective of their kind of performances at the end of the season, but also just everything we've heard about from the players themselves and people around the club is they like Pochettino. They love working for him. This will be great disappointment to them. So, when they see the players as assets, it really is in a cold, calculated way. They do not see them maybe as part of that kind of process of deciding who stays and who goes. You may think that's irrelevant. You may think that's a good thing and kind of taking away player power. But I do think it is a little bit flippant when these are the guys who are going to be working under a new head coach who you need to flourish to make the club a success. And I think that's maybe an oversight. Just some of the tweets, I saw good tweets in terms of this decision again and the knock-on effect and what it says about Chelsea currently. Joe tweets, who is a great guy, great Chelsea commentator, just giving his thoughts. Bluco came into the club talking about how bad things were before and have proceeded to do all the chaotic things they claimed were wrong without winning any of the trophies that made it palatable. Chelsea Youth tweeted, how many more highly respected figures within the game are going to walk away from the club? The list grows. And Bassman 2 just takes stock for next season. Chelsea are currently without a men's manager, a front of shirt sponsor, a women's manager, a sleeve sponsor, a data department. I was speaking to someone yesterday about this with Chelsea, and it's weird that, for the first time in a very long time, basically since the women's team has become what it is, you've got both the men's and women's team without a head coach and kind of, interest and uncertainty about where both of those are going to go. But it speaks to that famous Hyperbole quote that keeps on coming back to bite him and bite this ownership group is not very well managed, not terribly well managed on the sporting side. That is how you describe Chelsea currently. The chaos they have set in. I've seen a lot of gaslighting. I've seen a lot of excuses made for this ownership. And I don't think a lot of them convince me. I don't think they convince me that the criticism and the concern that has come their way since Tuesday is unwarranted. Sure, there are extremes on social media. There always is. But the valid concern about where Chelsea are heading and the judgment of the people in charge, who are mainly Bedad Iqbali and the sporting directors, especially the sporting directors who've been getting a lot of power. And I said this on Tuesday, I'll say it again. Because they sacked Mauricio Pochettino, I think by logic they have to be dismissed. But all the reports are they are being entrusted. They have been given full trust by this ownership to keep going. And I think that's foolish, because I think, it cements this belief that there is a group at Chelsea of powerful people who believe they are above scrutiny, who believe that being challenged is not fair, is not right. All the briefings are always about how it's everyone else's fault instead of their own. I go back to this. Who spent $1 billion? Was it the fans' fault, or was it your fault for spending $1 billion rashly? Was it, ripping up some institutional knowledge within the club in a very short space of time? Was that the fans' fault, or was it your fault, your responsibility for sacking Thomas Tuchel, for sacking Graham Potter, for sacking Mauricio Pochettino? At some point, responsibility has to come on the shoulders of the people who actually make these decisions. Breaking news, I know, shocking, but it's not fans' faults for before Tuesday, feeling quite positive about the direction of travel at Stamford Bridge after a decent end to the season and feeling, all right, maybe I'm not fully convinced about Mauricio Pochettino if you're someone who's been critical of him, but you can't argue against the end to this season. At least we're back in European football. And in all of that kind of being thrown down the drain very quickly, they have created this situation. I don't want to hear about how it's other people's faults. We as Chelsea fans, once we get to the start of the season, will of course want the team to win because we're Chelsea supporters. That's what we want to do. But to try and gaslight people and make out that the criticisms they have and the concerns over the direction of the club and the people making these judgments and what it means for the short and long term, I think you are probably shouting against, to a brick wall basically, because this is what's going to happen. And I think fans are absolutely entitled to ask questions, and why I believe the club act in very stupid ways. I think they act in self-destructive ways. And I think this is the latest example of it. That isn't to say that someone coming in can't do a good job. I won't support them. I think there's no chance of people doing good stuff at Chelsea, because instinctively, I hope I'm wrong. I always say I hope my cynicism around things at Chelsea are wrong, because great, happy days. We if Chelsea continue to progress, we get into the Champions League, we make a really good appointment. No one in a year is going to be complaining, but you can't have a go at people for complaining or for asking questions currently about the chaos that has been so present at Chelsea without the trophies that was there under Roman Abramovich. So I think all of this together, just it highlights how much has gone wrong, how many questions there are still looming over this ownership, where the club is going to go, and the judgment of the people who are making these key decisions. And I think that there is a real big decision to be made, because whoever takes this job, I think there is obviously potential with this squad. I think there are some brilliant players, brilliant talent to work with. Absolutely. I'm not sitting here and telling you it's a crap squad. Obviously not. I think there are players I'm excited to see develop further. Getting it right is important. And I think that they have to recalibrate and understand that at a lot of successful clubs now, the head coach can't just be a sole figure that's kind of irrelevant. They have to be someone that kind of leads things. And I think that doesn't mean they're in charge of recruitment. It doesn't mean they say what goes, what doesn't go all the time. But you've got to listen to their expertise. And I think that's an issue with this group of owners and sporting directors too. It seems like they're kind of, they feel they're above all of that, and feel that everyone else in football, that list continues to grow of people who have either left the club, criticised the club, feel they're not going in the right direction. Either the three people kind of with the most power at Chelsea are right and everyone else is wrong, or very likely they have to change course. I mean, for Chelsea's sake, if they're going to keep on going down this route, we hope they are right and they have got something that none of us have seen yet. But they've got to get this choice right. And I think Simon Johnson brought this up on the Athletic podcast. If Kieran McKenna, let's say, is brought in, and then we get to April and March and he's in a similar position to Mauricio Pochettino, are you then sacking him again? And you're then left with another situation where more chaos, more uncertainty. And I think the profile of coach that has come up in the post-Pochettino days tells you the elite coaches, the top coaches, may not want to work at Chelsea because they see what has happened to several coaches so far, the reputation where even someone like Poch has worked under difficult circumstances, done an all right job, definitely a platform to build on with a young squad. And even that isn't good enough. And it really does clash with this idea of this ownership being different to the previous one. But as I keep on saying, if you don't have that success, but you have a revolving door of head coaches, things get very, very messy, because it's very hard for fans to look at that chaos and just kind of accept it. Because under Abramovich, it was always the case that we'd win trophies, there'd be chaos, there'd be confusion, there'd sometimes be concern. But when you had those trophies, when you had that success consistently in competitiveness and feeling like the club was, always going to be at the top of the game and doing its most to stay at the top of the game, it was easier for fans to digest. I think when you don't have that and you don't have that connection, you don't have those great memories, there is a reason why it's been teetering on the brink of, I think, fan revolt for some time now. So we will see in the upcoming days. A lot to get through. I'm sure we'll be reacting to whoever comes in. We'll break it down. If you're asking me right now, I think Kieran McKenna may be the favourite. And I have to say, I wouldn't, from just a guy and kind of a coaching point of view, I'd be quite interesting to see, especially if we're able to keep Amari Hutchinson and don't sell him, how that would work. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.